Okay, it seems we are live. That's great. Warm welcome to everyone. Thanks very much for being here at the live session. I'll wait a second or two to get a confirmation from my colleagues in Budapest, Lenke and Veronica, who are kind enough to help me with today's webinar, that everything is good, that the audio, video, everything works as it should. I now got confirmation. That's fantastic. So thanks so much for being here. My name is András Baneth, and I'm broadcasting this live from Brussels. We are recording this webinar, as we always do, so that you can rewatch it or share it with friends. We're publishing it on different platforms, and we'll be giving the transcript and the presentation as well, which I'll come back to in a second. But before anything else, if you have any concerns about the sound or the video, usually restarting the browser fixes most of these issues. If that doesn't work, using a different browser or a different device, your phone or tablet or other, fixes the problem. And if still you have issues, my colleagues are happy to help you live. So with that, good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Why don't you type into the chat box where you are dialing in from? This is my usual routine at the beginning of such webinars, just to see how broad the geographic scope of the audience is today at the live event. Ireland, France, Poland, Belgium, Valladolid, and Spain. All right, literally from all over, from Europe, from Greece, different parts of Europe. That's much appreciated, because this is a competition that concerns really so many fields and candidates from so many backgrounds, as we will discuss in the next hour or so. And it's a great opportunity now in the context of the pandemic and public health becoming higher up on the European Commission's agenda. All of that has a major impact on this particular competition, the very reason why it's been launched. So with that, thank you so much for sharing your location with me. And we're going to get started. I have here my little phone next to me. And the reason I'm going to be blinking at it is because that's where I get the questions that are being fed to me. So I don't need to keep watching the chat and being lost and confused and not focusing on sharing the presentation with you and explaining the complexities of this competition. So with that, let's get started. And a couple of housekeeping points. My background, you might know, I had worked in EU institutions for 7 years, at the Court of Justice in Luxembourg, and then at the Commission for almost 4 years. And then I'm co-founder of EU Training and author of the Ultimate EU Testbook. And then in terms of housekeeping, as I said before, we will be sharing with you the recording within a day of the event, along with the presentation that I'm putting on the screen, and the transcript, which is going to take a bit of time, but we always publish a transcript. So if you prefer reading it online, you can absolutely do that too. But of course, the very fact that you are here at the live session gives you the privilege of asking questions that I'll try to the best of my abilities to answer as we go along the presentation. If something comes to mind later and the live session has ended, or you're watching this as a recording, you can absolutely do that too by sending a message to the customer support, and my colleagues or myself will be happy to answer those. So with that, I'd like to encourage you to check out the community of EU Training, that over the many years we've been in business. We have over 100,000 registered users. Thousands of them are EU officials, which is something we're really proud of, that we could help them in their preparation. And we have different Facebook groups and a Facebook community where we share breaking news and sometimes funny stuff or rumors. And then all the test packages that are out there on our website on eutraining.eu are there for your perusal, with over 17 million questions that have been used. I mean, it's a pretty impressive number. And we have lots of webinars, some information sessions like the one we're having right now, but there are many others which are on methodology, on abstract verbal numerical reasoning questions. There are others dealing with the talent screener, which is particularly relevant for this particular competition, since talent screener is part of it. And then we have other dedicated webinars on the assessment center and different parts of the assessment center, like the case study or the structured or the situational competency-based interview, the SCBI, a relatively new addition in light of the pandemic measures. So with that, we're going to get started. And in the very end, we will share a special exclusive offer if you'd like to purchase any of our premium products or an online test simulations. You could do that with a 2-day special discount code. So this is your incentive to stay tuned, apart from the valuable information and the live questions and answers that we'll be sharing here now. So with that, let's get started. And I'd like to say a few words about where is the place of work, if and when, but rather when you succeed in this competition, where can you reasonably expect to work? Now, the interesting thing, the typical answer for that is Brussels or Luxembourg. But in this particular competition, there's also Grange, and those from Ireland, please forgive me if I'm pronouncing the name correctly. Grange, you'll tell me, is another place of work where DG Santé, so the health and the health policy directorate general of the European Commission, has a special office for food and veterinary inspectors. Essentially, it's a relatively small outlet, and interesting that it's in Ireland, but formally it belongs to DG Santé, and there it's mostly for those who are in food and veterinary audits and inspection who will be placed there. So that's interesting and rather unique, because for most competitions, the place of work is the classic Brussels, Luxembourg axis. But in this one, Ireland is another possibility, depending on which profile you apply for and which profile you succeed in will determine where you are going to be working. So with that, let's look at the process, the details, and a couple of tips and tricks and ideas how you can make the most of this competition and succeed. So application, how many positions are available? You probably already know that if you've read the notice of competition. There are 3 profiles or segments, I could call that, or 3 fields within this particular competition. You can only apply for one of these, and you cannot apply for 2 or more. So you need to make a choice. In some cases, the choice will be pretty straightforward, depending on which degree or diploma you originally have. In other cases, if your background qualification is more versatile for the sake of the competition, so for instance, if you have perhaps a biochemistry degree or something linked to toxicology or something similar, that could qualify you for more than one profile. So in that case, you need to make a choice. But in other cases, your diploma and your work experience will be the determining factors as to which profile you must choose. There are 3, as you can tell, 41, 30, and 30 places available in each, which is a pretty high number. So it might seem relatively limited for those of you who might be new to EU competitions, but in terms of the number of permanent officials that EU institutions will eventually hire, this is a large competition. It's a specialist competition, so the rules are somewhat different from the so-called generalist competitions. It's a specialist one, and we'll look at the whole process, why, or in what sense, or in which steps does it differ from the generalist ones. But then again, even for a specialist competition, it's considered a relatively large one. It's understandable, given the importance, thanks to the pandemic and thanks to everything we've witnessed in the past roughly 2 years, the importance of health policy. So generally the health, policymaking in health and the broad sense of health, where food policy and issues related to food regulations, food legislation, and food policy, all of that has become extremely important in Europe. Hence, the need from the institutions to hire a relatively large number of staff. So with that, you can see the three domains, which I'm going to just read out. So policymaking and lawmaking in the field of health, Then there's policymaking, lawmaking in the field of food safety. And then there's the third one, which is auditing, inspection, and evaluation in the field of health and food safety. So there, the uniqueness of the profile number 3 is that it's auditing and inspection, whereas the other two are about policymaking and lawmaking. Application deadline, 22nd of June, so pretty much a month from now. Do not miss it. Do not leave your application to the last moment. Make sure that you finalize everything that you need to, you fill in the right things online, and you hand it in at least a day or two before the deadline, because on the deadline, many people leave it to the last moment. Servers might crash, or you might get a last minute impediment, and you won't succeed in handing it in on time. And there is no exception to anyone. Usually it's noon Brussels time. So again, just do it on time. More importantly, and this is perhaps the most important question in every competition, and in this one in particular, are you eligible? Do you have the right background, profile, qualifications, experience, etc., to be eligible for this competition? So as in every case, there are general conditions. So you need to meet certain very basic criteria in order to qualify for the competition. What are these? You need to have an EU citizenship. So for instance, a UK passport is no longer eligible. You need to have completed the military service, if that's compulsory in your country. As far as I know, perhaps in Austria, perhaps in Greece, and in maybe 1 or 2 other countries, it's compulsory. In other places, this is not. So this is a relatively easy criterion to fulfill. And then number 3 is you need to meet the character requirements of the job, which we often wonder about what exactly that means, but perhaps a criminal record might be a problem. Or if certain aspects of the job require, for instance, security clearance because of the sensitivity, or because you're exposed to trade negotiations or highly confidential data, commercial or political or military or other, then that clearance needs to be ensured, and this requirement refers to that. Language rules. Language rules are pretty straightforward, but you need to pay attention to that you choose the right language combination, so you also optimize your chances of succeeding. Here's what I mean. So there's always a language 1 and language 2 in these competitions that EPSO administers, EPSO being the acronym for European Personnel Selection Office. So for the competitions, there's a language 1, which by law needs to be one of the 24 official languages of the EU. That again is quite an easy choice for most people, depending on what's your mother tongue, as long as your mother tongue is one of the EU's 24 official languages. And it's decoupled from your passport. So if you happen to have a Spanish passport, but you've lived all your life in the Netherlands and you dream and swear and communicate in Dutch, well, then that's going to be probably language 1. It's entirely up to you. If you're in a good situation that you speak multiple languages, well, then you can basically choose any language that you master to such degree that you can express yourself and read and understand things in that language. So for instance, I often give my own personal example. I'm Hungarian, I speak English, French, and my Spanish is very rusty, so I probably wouldn't choose that. But I could choose Hungarian, I could choose English, I could choose French as language 1, though my written French is not that good. So my logic, and I'm sharing this personal example, so perhaps you can take some tips from it. My logic would be, I want to choose a language 1 in which I can process information the best. So I can, when it comes to the abstract verbal numerical reasoning, when it comes to really processing information from a screen, that would be my language 1. So I can quickly understand. But language 2, as we will see on this slide, it needs to be English or French. And the assessment center, so the second phase of the competition, assessment center is being conducted in language 2. So language 2 should be a language in which you can express yourself at ease. So for me, that probably would be English. That is reasoning. Again, if you have the luxury of speaking multiple languages and being able to express yourself in those languages, then try to pick a language one where you can passively, at least passively, understand the language best, and then choose a language 2, which is English or French. But again, if you can choose between these, in which you can truly actively express yourself most at ease. And these two obviously have to be different. So you cannot have English as language 1 or 2. So language rules are pretty straightforward, and it shouldn't be a particularly difficult thing to pick and choose one. What is a little more difficult, and I'm sure there's going to be many questions around that, the qualifications. The qualifications in this particular competition, relatively straightforward. 3 plus 7 or 4 plus 6. That's pretty much the rule. So as you can see, 4 years of studies, completed university studies of at least 4 years, and then 6 years of professional experience. Now, both of these, both your diploma and your professional experience, have to be relevant to the competition. So I would not qualify for this competition because I have a degree in law and European studies, which is among one of the profiles. I think it's for the the food safety. I believe it's listed that I could qualify for that with my legal degree, but my professional experience has nothing to do with food safety or public health or any related topics. So it has to be relevant, either 4 plus 6 or 3 plus 7. And the subjects are specified by EPSO. I believe, yes, we have this list. So it's basically medical and health sciences. And they write this, they use this term in particular. So in particular, it doesn't mean only, because I don't think this is a fully exhaustive list. So it's not that only if you have these particular degrees are you eligible. And I quickly saw from the corner of my eyes this question from Vasco, that can a medical doctor apply? I very much think so. So medical, it's a medical science, obviously. So a medical doctor, I think by all means should be eligible for this competition, provided you have the right professional experience that they require, that you have worked in relevant areas that they list. And then there are many others. So you can see healthcare systems, pharmacology, pharmaceutical products, toxicology. Yeah, here's my previous example, my personal one, social, political science, or law. So lawyers can apply, provided that their professional experience is relevant. So you can see that other subjects are directly relevant to the nature of the duties. So it's still a relatively open-ended list, because if you have you've studied something which is not listed here, but it's entirely clear that it's relevant because you dealt with biophysics, and perhaps biophysics is not specifically mentioned here, but it's just as relevant as toxicology or microbial resistance. All of that would qualify. So it's more the substance of it than the actual title of the degree that seem to matter most. Now, one very important legal disclaimer here is I'm doing my very best to be accurate and to give you information that is based on all the official sources, but we're not the official source. The official source is the European Personnel Selection Office, and in some cases, it's the selection board, which can make the ultimate call on a given qualification or background. So they have the legal authority to decide on those matters. When it comes to the actual job description, and that also ties back into what sort of experience are they looking for that you have had after you've obtained your diploma. this list, which is, I know, very fine print and hard to read, but it's in the notice of competition. You'll see it in the PowerPoint we'll be sharing. All of that is shown. So this is a more detailed description of what exactly they are looking for. And just for the sake of example, carry out regulatory tasks in various fields. So when it's healthcare, there is an enormous amount of pharmacovigilance all the way to the authorization of medical, non-medical interventions, medical devices. Now, in the context of vaccines, there's a million types of topics that are eligible and kind of experience that you can reasonably argue is highly relevant to the nature of the duties that they are seeking. And then qualifications for field number 2. So this is about the food safety aspect. Exactly the same principle, 4-year degree, 6 years experience, or 3-year degree and 7 years experience, both of which have to be relevant. So it have to be relevant. And again, the areas of study, it's somewhat more nuanced or more limited for the food safety part. So as you can see, in particular, it's related to veterinary medicine, it's related to food nutrition legislation, biochemistry, obviously, food chemistry, biology. And again, social political sciences, if you have dealt with food law or issues linked to food packaging, perhaps, or other aspects of food policy at large. And again, other subjects directly relevant to the nature of the duties. And then there's area, again, a similar list to the one we saw earlier. And then there is the field number 3, which is the audit and the inspection. Same principle, 4 + 6, 3 + 7, with relevant degree and relevant work experience. So areas of study, very similarly, natural sciences at large. So you can see veterinary medicine, pharmacy, medicine, biology. There are tons of fields which are highly relevant to this area. And again, they even say that this is not a fully comprehensive list. Other topics or other degrees can also qualify you. And here's a huge, what I call a laundry list of the nature of the duties, and that kind of ties into the kind of work experience that they will be seeking, that they will consider relevant to the nature of the duties. So before we go into this part, I know there are a couple of questions coming in, and Veronica and Lenka are kind enough to answer some of those, which can be immediately answered through chat. But I see here 2 which I will address. So here's one. Is the level of language 2 a criteria to succeed? Now, they say it has to be so-called B2, is it? Something like that. It's basically a reference that it doesn't need to be mother tongue level. So it doesn't need to be fully fluent and fully perfect and all that, but it has to be a good working knowledge in that language. In practice, there's no it's not like an SAT or not like a TOEFL or Cambridge or DALF or DELE or any of these language exams. None of this is actually required of you. So it's how you apply the language, how you are able, or to what extent are you able to express yourself? Are you able to articulate your thoughts, write a case study? So it's applying the language rather than testing the language per se. Question number 2, completed military service. Does it count as work experience even when done before the bachelor's and the master's degree? I don't think so. So military experience is something that probably you had that imposed upon you, and it's an obligation for you as a citizen of a given country, but I highly doubt that this would be considered work experience. Typically, what they sort of the rule of thumb for the selection board and EPSO for the work experience is that after you've obtained your degree, that's when the clock starts ticking. So that's when your work experience would actually be counted. You may have done some work during your university studies, But again, not until you've obtained your degree would that count. If you have a bachelor, so the 3-year degree, and then you started working, but in parallel, you also obtained a master's degree, as long as your work was paid and it was a formal employment or even self-employed, but then you can prove that the kind of work you did was relevant to the duties, that can count. So as far as I can tell, and with the caveat that it all depends on certain personal factors and your situation, but by and large, once you've received your minimal degree that is required for these positions, you can start working, or the working time can count. Right, I don't see any other immediate question at this point. I'm sure there are some others. Oh yeah, here's one. How is PhD counted, degree or work experience? That's a frequent question. And honestly, I don't know for 100% how exactly that's counted, because I think, well, part of probably every PhD, but at least for most PhD, you need to teach, you need to research, you need to do certain things, and often you would get paid for that in one way or another. So once you have the underlying degree, if you're pursuing a PhD in parallel, that can count as a work experience. I think it also depends whether it's a full-time PhD or a part-time PhD. But if you have, again, depending on your personal situation, you might want to ask the selection board, and they might point you to some policy or some statement or something in that regard to say, well, as long as you worked during your PhD or you were remunerated during your research, that counts as work experience. So my guess would be probably yes, but then again, I wouldn't say it with 100% certainty. And often really the best is to ask them for guidance just to make sure that you are eligible, and then the sufficient number of years will add up. Okay, actually, here's one more. How will the 6 years of experience be assessed? What do they mean by 2 years of experience in legislation implementation? So legislation implementation is basically applying the legislation. So if you worked in a law firm or you worked in a national inspection authority, or you worked perhaps in a company as a biochemist, and making sure that the company complies with the relevant food or veterinary or public health legislation, that is experience in legislation implementation. So making sure that the legislation works. If you work in a public administration, often it's easier. It's more relevant to the kind of job that a public authority like the European Commission would be dealing with. If you work in a private sector, that might be a little harder to make the case. Again, there are just so many variations as to what the substance of the work was that it's hard to say anything in very generic terms. Okay, there's one more question. I see that. I'll come back to that. Why this is a great opportunity, I probably don't need to convince most of you, because you're quite familiar with the many benefits and the perks that the job gives. But it's a great opportunity, obviously, for very attractive salaries. This is 87 level. So we have on eutraining.eu a salary calculator. So you can go there, stay with me, don't leave yet. But after the webinar, you can go there and do a simulation based on your family situation, if you're single or married or have children, depending on which country you would likely be recruited from, because it depends whether you're already living in Belgium or not, or if it's Ireland, again, if you're already there or not. There are a couple of factors to consider, but broadly, an 87 job would have the salary of around 5,500 euros net per month, which is a pretty attractive proposition. And it also comes with many benefits. So there's the European school if you have children, then there's health insurance for you and your partner, and a couple other allowances. So that's the financial part, but of course there's also the health insurance and other perks. And then there is something which is often the main motivation of most people, is working in an international organization and dealing with international, at least minimum European, but often international issues linked to food or public health policies. So that often is the main motivation. And of course, all these material benefits are extremely important. But the fact that it gives you a very diverse and very interesting job is often the main motivator for most applicants. So with that, how to get one of these jobs? And again, before I go there, I see that there are 2 questions I've not yet answered. So by when can a successful applicant that passes all selection steps be expected to start working? Well, I didn't specifically mention it yet, but it reminds me to explain that what EPSO does is selection. So they are the ones running the selection process, at the end of which they create a so-called reserve list. So what EPSO does is not recruitment, they do selection. So from the moment a competition is launched, like in this very case, so here we are in May 2021, and application deadline in a month. Once that closes, the selection process essentially begins. You take the different steps. We're going to look at it, what type of exams you need to pass in order to end up on the reserve list. And once you do, that's when you become recruitable. When can we reasonably expect the reserve list to come out? So the whole competition to finish? Hard to guess, but roughly probably end of this year. So probably not sooner. Now, if Lenke and Veronica, based on your experience, you have a different view, please put that into the chat box for everyone to see. But my rough guess would be towards the end of this year. It might even kind of go on until January, February. There are a couple of factors there, especially how many candidates there are, the relatively large number of candidates, or in the end, laureates, so individuals who are placed on the reserve list. Given that it's a relatively large number, it's going to take more time because they just need to evaluate, assess, and test more people. So again, roughly end of the year. And from that point on, the relevant EU institutions, and in this case, the European Commission, or more specifically, DG Sante, they can pick candidates, or it's no longer candidates, but laureates from the reserve list and hire them. Now, even that hiring is not automatic. What happens is they will invite you for an interview. Perhaps 2 or 3 people from the same reserve list will be invited to an interview, and then they decide. But from that point on, it's quite straightforward that you are going to be hired sooner or later. Roughly 85 to 90% of those on the reserve list will get hired. And do not get scared or despair. Even that 10% often is not hired, not because the institutions don't want to hire them, but their life circumstances may have changed and they just no longer want to go for an EU job, despite having passed the competition. Bottom line, when can you expect reasonably to be hired? Maybe a year from now. And I know it might be a little discouraging and it might be next January, February, but again, setting your expectations and understanding that this is a relatively long process, this is a likely timeline that you can expect. All right, with that, I see there's one more question, but I'd rather just go on and come back to that in a few moments. How to get one of these jobs? Well, certainly follow the application process and meticulously, because every box that needs to be ticked and every file that needs to be uploaded, make sure everything is properly done, properly filled out, and you take the sufficient time to fill it in. Given the sheer number of applicants for most competitions, if somebody doesn't meet any formal criterion or criteria, it's very easy to disqualify them because there are so many others who are vying for those positions. So make sure that all the formal parts are properly done. You don't do it too much in a rushed manner, and making sure that you fill in everything that you need to fill in. Carefully picking your language 1 and 2 according to those ideas that I've shared with you, and submit the application, which you can do in any of these 24 official languages for equality of access. But if you like to do that in English or French or any of or German as the main languages, perhaps it's somewhat easier to do that. But legally speaking, you have the right to fill that in any of the 24 languages. But then the talent screener, which is an integral part of the application process, needs to be filled in English or French. And this is something we'll come back to in a moment of what the talent screener is. So the deadline, as we said before, 22nd of June, and that's quite clear. And then the talent screener, which, as I just mentioned, is an integral part of the application process. What is it? What is a talent screener? Now, great news. Not only will I say a few words already now and a couple of ideas, but we have some ebooks, we have tip-centric articles, we even have a dedicated webinar on how to make the most of the talent screener. So I'll be sharing with you a couple of ideas already now, but if you'd like to dig deeper, many of these resources are available. You might want to check them out. Hopefully they can help you to craft a more persuasive talent screener response. So talent screener is basically a set of questions. It's a set of questions, open-ended questions, but quite targeted, that you need to fill out as an applicant. And it's often, not just often, always used in so-called specialist competitions, like the one we're talking about right now. How is it scored? It's scored in a way that every question would typically have a score from 0 to 3. That's the most classic one. It might differ from one competition to another, but typically they would give 0 to 3 scores or points for each question. Now, do not despair if for some questions you just need to say, no, I don't have that experience. So here was this earlier question about implementing, implementing food law or EU legislation. Unless that's a must-have listed in the application criteria, some questions in the talent screener, you just simply will not have that experience. And that's okay. As long as many of the other questions you can respond to in the affirmative, and you can say, well, I do have that experience, and then you give all the details. So how do you maximize a score? Well, first of all, principle number 1, always be truthful. Do not make up stuff. Do not lie, obviously. Do not put there something which is not backed up by experience and evidence. Having said that, you can still make the most of your talent screener responses while remaining entirely truthful and honest to present that in the most persuasive manner. So when you have a certain experience, you are not going to just give a very broad statement. Yes, I worked in this field for 2 years. You can be very concrete and very specific with bullet points, with numbers, with figures, with proof points to persuade the person reading the talent screener that you actually merit 3 points. And that is a very important idea to bear in mind, because it's going to be the assessors, usually 2 of them, who are scoring or reviewing the talent screener independently of each other. And if there's a big discrepancy among the scores, then a 3rd person will be brought in to ensure objectivity to the greatest extent possible, that they will be scoring it. It's not computer, AI, or algorithm, or any other automated system that scores it. It's humans. And that's why communication principles of clear communication, structured communication, proof points, narrative, and many of these aspects come into play. So it's really important that the way you respond to the talent screener will certainly have an impact on the score that you'll be given. So here are a couple of tips. Try to answer yes to as many questions as possible. Again, emphasizing that you need to be truthful. So if you have some experience which can be sold or packaged or presented in a way that reinforces your application and it corresponds to the question being asked, well, then try to say yes to that particular question. Provide lots of valuable information, but be selective, be mindful of to what degree, how detailed are you going to be in your responses. Because I've seen a few talent screeners over the years where candidates just dump an insane amount of data on those poor EPSO assessors or selection board members, and they just get lost in the detail. So this doesn't need to be a full list of all your publications if you've done a PhD in all the scientific papers where you've published something. Perhaps they will ask about your publications, but it's not like a 5-paragraph quote citation or full reference of the journal and it's whatever impact score and all the perhaps unnecessary details which are not immediately relevant to your application. So make sure that you are comprehensive in your answer, but not putting there unnecessary information. Concrete versus abstract answers. Again, a very common mistake when it comes to talent screener is to say, I have a lot of experience in food inspection. Okay, what does that mean? So be very careful with adjectives which are just too abstract, too broad to say a lot of experience, or I've worked in multiple companies on these issues. What does it mean? Is it 5? Is it 15? Or to say I have international experience. Great. What is international experience? Is it because you're French and you worked in Bulgaria and in Estonia and in Pakistan? Be more specific. Give those examples. Name those names, because otherwise the problem with these adjectives is that everybody has a different interpretation of it. Another idea there is some questions may resemble each other or look like a previous answer. So you might be tempted, just to save a bit of time, to copy paste some of your responses from one answer to another. Generally, that's not a good idea. Try to tailor it to that particular question in the talent screener and make it a bit more unique. Or you might want to highlight different aspects of your achievements or publications or experience than what you put into a previous answer. Other tips is really formatting is important. A person reading it will easily get lost if it's just an unstructured mesh of text. You probably want to use bullet points. And even if you cannot do any fancy formatting, just a little asterisk or a dash or any other visual element that segments and structures your message will help the reader understand it. And if there's more clarity of understanding, chances are the score will be more favorable for you. And also think a little bit about, as a good salesman would, trying to think what's in it for them. So why does your experience in that research institute, at that public authority, in that private company's research department, why does that ultimately benefit a public body such as the European Commission? So what's in it for them? Say my experience working 3 years on biochemical research can be a great contribution to the policymaking process of the European Commission in this particular field. So saying what I did can be helpful for you. Instead of saying I did this, I did that, I achieved this, I achieved that. And then hoping that the reader will make that mental shift and say, that's actually good for us. Spoon feed it to them, tell them that this is why it can be useful. And again, this is not properly speaking, a job application, but it's about your professional experience that through which you want to convince them that you are eligible for this competition. And again, EU institutions, EPSO, are quite formal, so you might want to look up DG Sante's website, look at a couple of press releases or reports and stuff like that, a bit familiarize yourself with their language, with their terminology or certain terms. Let's say I give you just one simple example, the term sustainability. Everybody has a different interpretation of that. So EU institutions might call something sustainable, which from another angle, or depending on which country you might be coming from, the term sustainability maybe had a very different meaning in that context. So trying to speak their language as in speak their jargon. And then finally, a reference to the webinar that I had mentioned earlier is, what is it called? Everything you need to know about EPSO's talent screener. And probably we should put there to make it fully tabloid style, but you never dare to ask. So be courageous and dare to ask. We're happy to assist you in any way we can. So you can ask it now or ask after as a support email. But then again, we have more information and more tips and very concrete examples of how you can reframe certain things that will play to your advantage. So before I look at the actual exams in a nutshell, I see a couple of questions coming in. How are the years of relevant work experience specifically defined and measured? So the work time, how does it count, and voluntary work count? Typically, paid work is considered work. So if you did voluntary work, it may not count as work experience. There could be exceptions. So if you perhaps worked with Doctors Without Borders or some charity organization, and you were not paid, but you did relevant work, as long as you have some certification or any kind of document to back it up, that still should count as work experience. It's not that you were, I don't know, an ice cream seller in a restaurant, which is totally not related to the job, but you did the relevant stuff. So it's hard to say more meaningful things about this, how it's being counted. But again, the rule of thumb is after your diploma, paid assignments or paid occupations would count as work. If there is doubt about having the sufficient number of years, again, I would encourage you to contact the selection board and try to make sure that or understand better how they consider certain work experiences. Okay, do you know when the first exam will be held? So the first exam is this, so the pre-selection exam. But then again, it depends on how many candidates there are. If, this is the principle EPSO uses, if there are lots of candidates, and lot means perhaps, I'm not actually sure, I think maybe 5 or maybe 10 times, but again, it's not always determined, but there's a lot more candidates than the number of places on the reserve list, okay, perhaps 5, 8, 10 times more. So in this case, more than 1,000 applicants, because there are roughly 100 places available. In that case, there's going to be a computer-based test, a pre-selection exam like the one you see on the screen, with abstract, verbal, and numerical reasoning test to pre-select candidates. If there aren't so many applicants in the early at that stage, this kind of exam, the abstract, verbal, numerical reasoning, will be part of the assessment center. So you see there's a difference, either using it to pre-select candidates who can go to the assessment center, or if there aren't so many candidates, then these exams are part of the assessment center and the scoring is more flexible. But if it's really used as a pre-selection, then there's a real competition because they're looking at the scores and only those with the highest score will pass to the next stage. So this is an information, given the uncertainty as to how many people are going to apply, they built in these two scenarios. But when it's going to be held, well, it depends also on that, but hard to tell. So if 22nd of June is the deadline, I'm not sure it's really going to be held before the summer break. August is pretty dead, so maybe late August would be my guess. But then again, who knows? If they really want to speed it up, given the pandemic, given the importance of health in Europe, as a policy, they might push it and say we're going to have these exams before the summer break, so late July. So we'll see. That's roughly my guess. Right now I'm in a previous competition. It's 86, so this one is actually better because it's 87, I presume. Could I still be eligible for this competition if I already started to work for the previous one? Yes, the answer is yes. You can apply to as many competitions as you like. Often they might have limitations as to which field you can apply for. So in this particular one, this is one competition with 3 fields. So you can only apply for one field. But this is one competition, you can apply for this. If tomorrow there's another competition for nuclear scientists and you happen to have that qualification, you can apply for that as well. And if there's another competition in a totally different field, you can apply for that too. And even if you are hired and working, your competition can still go on, and who knows, maybe you can switch easier after a year or two. It basically increases your opportunities. Right, so what about these pre-selection tests? You probably know a fair bit about it if you have ever interacted with EU jobs, EU careers, and EPSO exams. So this is a so-called classic psychometric test. You have verbal reasoning where you have 20 questions and a limited time, so 35 minutes that you need to complete this. And it's more about logic of the text. It's not about linguistic tests, so vocabulary. Obviously, that's an important part, but it's about trying to find the correct statement on the basis of the text. Then you have numerical reasoning, where you have 10 questions in 20 minutes. So there's a very intense time pressure. So you need to do it fast. You are given a virtual calculator. That's good, but still you need to quickly understand how to decode a chart, a table, and find the correct answer. And then you have the abstract reasoning, which is often the most difficult for most candidates because it's only 10 minutes for 10 questions. So 1 minute per question, and finding the next graph or the next image in a sequence. Again, it's more about logic and abstract logic that you need to apply. The pass mark is somewhat flexible here. So you have the verbal reasoning has its own score, but the numerical and the abstract are combined. So if you're really bad at abstract, but pretty good at numerical, you can still pass with a pretty good score. But as I said earlier, if this is used as a pre-selection exam, the simply passing with the scores on the screen is not enough. You need to be among the top candidates with the highest score to qualify for the next stage. So generally speaking, it's worth performing well because of the competitive nature of these exams. Then comes the talent screener review. Again, depending on how many candidates there are and whether the pre-selection tests are really pre-selection or they are part of the assessment center. And once they've reviewed the talent screener, comes the assessment center. So the assessment center used to be a fully physical exercise in Brussels, but these days, and likely even for this competition, it's going to be pretty much entirely online. Yeah, with the caveat that this might change when it comes September or later the year. We'll see. But essentially, these are the 4 tests that are required of you. And very likely, all of this will be held online. So there's a case study exam, which currently happens in test centers, so which are available in every EU country and even beyond. So there's a case study. Then there is the SCBI, so the structured competency-based interview. So there's a background file that you need to read. And on that basis, you have interaction with the assessors based on that background information. And then there are 2 others which are related to the field. So one is an interview in the field. So that is about your professional experience, your knowledge about that particular subject of your competition. And the other one is a written test in the field. So that again is as the name suggests, written test related to the topic of the competition. Yeah, so with that, here are the pass marks. Again, nothing extraordinary, but as you can see, the scoring for your subject matter expertise, so the scoring for the field-related interview and the written test, they are very high up. So they weigh very heavily in the overall score. So the situational competency-based test and the case study, the general case study, they're about your competencies. There are 8 competencies that EPSO evaluates. And then you need to know stuff. You need to be an expert in that field, hence those 2 other tests and the relatively high scores linked to it. And then if everything goes well, and why wouldn't it, you have the reservist. Reservist, that's where your name appears in the official journal. You can opt out of that if you have privacy concerns, but still you are in the database that you are recruitable for EU jobs. It has a validity. Often it's 1 year, but in the case of specialist competitions, that is usually longer, often 2 years or even more, or until a new similar competition is launched. So that is not something you should worry about. And then comes recruitment, as mentioned earlier. So how to get one of these jobs? Well, practice a lot, that's for sure. It all depends on what your baseline is, how comfortable you are in numerical reasoning, or how comfortable you are when it comes to things related to the assessment center. At this point, focus on the exam step by step. So you just focus on filling in the talent screener to the best of your abilities. Then you can focus on the pre-selection if there is already a pre-selection at that stage. So take it step by step, but practice consistently. Look at it as if this were a sports preparation where you just cannot gain that stamina or muscle or technique 5 minutes or 5 days before the competition day. So build it up over time, have a certain plan, practice regularly, perhaps with friends, perhaps you want to get together with a couple of others or even virtually and motivate each other. You want to learn test methodology, and here I'm testing your accuracy of reading. If you spot that there's an E missing, you know, this was on purpose, right? Persistence is key, and just do lots of simulations. You want to be intimately familiar with the interface and how it works, and it's not that you need to figure everything out at the exam proper. So this is where we're trying to be as helpful as we can. Our interface looks almost entirely like EPSO's. The kind of questions we're going to great extent, to great length to simulate the length, the difficulty, the style of the exams, and basically working on it to provide the most suitable and the best preparation tools. And we have all the tools on the website. I'm happy to tell you, actually, you're the first group with whom I can share these news that we just launched a new project. We're going to have verbal reasoning in every language of the EU, meaning every official language of the EU, all 24. So we're going to have verbal reasoning in all EU languages probably by September, October, perhaps even sooner. So that includes Maltese and Gaelic and Latvian and many others, which we may not cover yet, but it's going to be fully comprehensive. So if you'd like to practice verbal reasoning in any of those 24, you'll have the chance in a couple of months. With that, let me just maybe highlight a couple of webinars, other resources, all of which you can find on the website. We also offer personal coaching and group classes virtually, and hopefully very soon in person. And there is also a Facebook group dedicated just to this competition. It's a screenshot of the books, but I'd rather just leave the discount code on the screen while I take a look at the other questions that have come in since I addressed a few a moment ago. Are the points of talent screener added to the points of the rest of the test in order to have the final grade? No, that is not added. So the talent screener point it helps the assessors rank the applicants, but then those points are not carried on. The points are separate. As you could see for the assessment center, it has their own exams and their own scoring system, but the talent screener points are not added on top. Then, is this competition for people who've already trained for a long time, or is it possible to start preparing now? Entirely possible to start preparing now. So there is lots of time. And really, there's even the application is in a month, but then the actual exams are only starting much later. So there's absolutely no disadvantage if you've never done any of these tests. You can check out those resources, you can do simulations, you can familiarize yourself with all of that. So it's entirely possible. Do not be discouraged, on the contrary. Are candidates with less than 6 years of work experience be allowed to participate? Because I assume they will be disqualified for the second round. Yeah, if you have less than 6 years work experience, probably you will not qualify for the competition, given that it's a pretty strict formal criterion to have at least 6 years work experience. So in that case, if you really cannot prove the 6 years experience, then probably you will not be eligible for this competition. Then I would encourage you to check out others which are still open, or the ones that are going to be launched in the near future. Is the situational competency-based interview, so the SCBI, almost the same as the situational judgment of administrators? No, it's different. So those of you who were familiar with the situational judgment test, that was a multiple choice test and computer-based. Whereas the situational competency-based interview, it's based on a background file, sort of a briefing, and it's a face-to-face, well, virtual, but first face-to-face live simultaneous exercise with an assessor or interviewer with whom you need to interact on the basis of that file, and they ask questions from you. So in that regard, these are pretty different things in terms of how the test goes. 2021 Assessment Center book, I presume you mean the Ultimate EU Test Book 2021 edition for the Assessment Center, covers the current remote setting. Yes, we added a chapter and refinement and more wording. Oops, and I just kicked my own camera. Added some wording on the changes that EPSO has brought about as a result of the pandemic, so that you will find in the book. I mean, it's not massive substantive changes, but again, those are still covered in the book. Do you have books to use for preparation on top of online packages? So I can tout my own horn and say there's the Ultimate EU Test Book, different editions and targeted for exams. So you might want to check those out. Thank you, Lenka Veronica, for putting that right on the screen. And there are other books, of course. I'm not going to pitch my competitors, but you can Google around and you can find other resources which are related to EPSO exams or psychometric tests as well. And then perhaps the final question before we close off. The online application needs to be done in one go, or it can be saved and resumed multiple times. I'm pretty sure you can save it and come back to it. So I don't think that you need to start it and finish everything in one go. I'm almost certain that you can go back and edit things before you hand it in. Obviously, once you've handed it in online, you can no longer edit its contents. All right, one more question just came in. If you pass the talent screener and the pre-evaluation, the pre-selection test, but fail on the technical interview and assessment centers, what happens to the score? Can you redo parts or not? Unfortunately, those scores are not saved. So it's strictly linked to the competition in question, and there's no carryover or there's no credit or there's no account, so to say, in which those scores are saved. So the competition is always sort of unique in the sense that the scores you get in one competition are not interchangeable to another competition. With that, in respect of everyone's time and the roughly 1 hour we had foreseen for this information session, I'll probably close it off. Please get in touch if you have any questions, if you have any information to share with us. We are always happy to hear. If you want us to treat it confidentially, of course we will. And if you have anything, a dilemma perhaps of language choice or other, again, we're happy to give you our guidance or our perspective. And all that's left for me probably is wish you good luck. I think it's a fantastic opportunity and really an amazing time for this competition. Everything that's happened in the past year or two obviously gives ample reasons why it's so relevant and topical. But also because health and food, veterinary issues, it's really a policy area that's growing. There's massive public interest that the policymakers and regulators are responding to. So this is a good time to deal with these topics on a European level, and I encourage you to check out these opportunities. So with that, Lenka, Veronica, thanks a lot for your support in the back and for helping me prepare for the presentation, and for everyone for being here. And good luck, keep us posted. And once you've succeeded, then we're going to be happy to celebrate with you. Perhaps we'll even fly over to Ireland and get a good Guinness there. So thanks so much. To be continued.